So how long do you guys usually go?
The last one we did about an hour and a half of recording, I think. And then
cool.
Basically until we shut up.
Yeah.
Cool.
Welcome to AT Banter, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything regarding the world of assistive technology. With our hosts, Steve Barkley, Rob Minot, and Ryan Fleury. Now, let's banter.
Well, welcome everybody to yet another episode of AT Banter. I'm Rob Minot, and today I am joined by Steve Barkley.
Hello there.
And Ryan Fleury.
Hi.
And we also have a very special guest with us, but I'm not going to tell you who it is quite yet, because I'm going to let Steve do that, because
you don't know his name, do you?
I do know his name. That's an outrageous.
You're just blanking
comment.
on it, aren't you?
I'm not blanking. There's no blanking.
I do
happening.
that all the time. I totally blank on names.
No, I know. I know it's Adam. We go way back, me and Adam.
Yeah.
We went to college together, but that's a whole different story.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, we were dorm mates. Oh, the craziness we got into.
Hijinks.
The unfortunate thing is I lived at home in university.
I lived in his basement.
Good times. Good times.
It was good times.
All right. So we have with us today our special guest star, Adam Wilton from the Provincial Resource Centre for the Visually Impaired.
Great. Thanks for having me here.
We are happy to have you.
You are our first guest.
Really?
Absolutely.
That's true. You are
Wow.
our first guest. You're the first non-Arogaite.
That's right. Ooh. And he's going to be here until he gets out of the ropes, which could take a while.
That's right.
No, but there's still duct tape after the ropes.
I'll chew through that in short order, I think.
Maybe.
So, right. I'm industrious that way.
What are we going to talk about today?
We should talk about Braille and Braille literacy.
Wow, that's perfect, because I feel like our guest could know something about that.
I think he does.
Wow, it's like we plan these things.
I know, right? Yes, I've heard Adam talk quite passionately about Braille literacy. So when we decided to do the topic, he seemed like the natural guy to come in and advocate.
Well, I'm happy. Seriously, how long do you guys have again? Because this could go on forever. I'm happy to talk about Braille. Just to give you a bit of background on where I'm from, I'm the manager of the Provincial Resource Centre for the Visually Impaired, and so we do a lot of the Braille production for students around the province, textbooks, provincial exams, novels. We even do sheet music, Braille music.
Nice.
In sheet form if requested. So a lot of Braille passes through our hands on any, actually a lot of either passes through or is produced by us on any given day, week, month.
Excellent. Well, maybe we should back up a little bit and talk a little bit about what Braille actually is for anybody who might be listening and is unfamiliar with Braille.
Absolutely. So Braille is a tactile code of language. Now, whether that's English or French or Mandarin, you have a tactile representation. And in the case of Braille, it's a 2x3 matrix, and the different dots in their orientation correspond to different letters of the alphabet, or in the case Braille is somewhat Braille is very interesting in that it is both an alphabetic, logographic, and syllabic code all at once. So alphabetic, we're all familiar with A, B, C, D, E.
Well, everybody except Ryan.
Yeah, he loses
ZYX, WV.
He only speaks computer. That's it.
Oh, all right. And then, of course, it's Braille. The Braille code is contracted to save space and to make reading more efficient with the hands. And so you've also got syllabic contractions, let's say for CH or ST. And then you've also, from a logographic perspective, you've got whole words. So the words and, of, for, the, and with are all represented by individual symbols in Braille. So it's really quite an elegant code, and there's a pattern and a rhythm to it. Generally speaking, that's That's the code. And if I could say, Steve, because this actually did come up this morning, I was at the bank. Someone asked me what I did, and I told them. And they said, "Oh, how long did it take you to learn that language?" And I've, over the years, got kind of a little bit of an elevator speech going there, where it's,
I've heard it.
Yes, it's not a language; it's a tactile representation of our language, and so differs in that sense from, let's say, American Sign Language, which we get confused with quite often.
Understood. I will not call it a language as long as you're here to hear me.
Thank you. Not
as soon as you're out the door, though. I guess.
Not a language. Not a language.
Alrighty. So, what I'm pitching you softballs here, but what would you say is the importance of Braille? Why is Braille important?
Well, I think you have to turn that question on its head. Would we ever ask the question why is print important for students who are typically sighted? And my answer to that, my response to that is always, Braille is one of many ways that we have to represent oral language in written or embossed format. If you don't have a means of representing thoughts and ideas and facts, anything other than an oral language, you basically get a generational game of telephone happening where messages change as time goes on. So just generally speaking, Braille is important because everyone, whether they're typically sighted or have a visual impairment, needs a way of representing thoughts, ideas, feelings, histories, and Braille provides that in an accessible format.
I've noticed that over the years, in the time that I've worked in this industry, there seem to be ebbs and flows in how much emphasis is put on Braille teaching, Braille instruction. And I know when I was first starting out in the industry, there were a lot of people out there who were really de-emphasizing Braille with the idea that there were going to be all kinds of electronic note takers with speech output that blind people would be able to use, and they wouldn't need to use Braille anymore.
Well, it's interesting you mention that, because every once in a while, a popular news outlet will put a news article out, is Braille dead? ? Yes. Really these doom and gloom articles, and quite frankly, for the most part, things are Braille has been called prematurely dead, seeming every few years. And then, of course, everyone on my Facebook who knows I have anything to do with visual impairment will send me this link and said, "Oh my goodness, Adam, is Braille dead?" And in fact, I believe the opposite. I believe that technology has brought Braille into the 21st century and has changed and added to the ways in which it can be used. I know that's a whole separate issue that we'll probably get to later in the podcast, but I don't feel like I feel like many of those stories emphasizing technology over Braille, it's a false dichotomy. The two exist symbiotically now.
Absolutely.
And I think too, sorry, Steve, I think too that, you need to kind of back up a little bit and define what literacy is. Literacy is the ability to read and write. Not listening to an audiobook isn't reading. Mm-hmm. Having that tactile representation of the language and being able to read that through your fingertips makes you literate.
I agree. And, it's interesting because there's been, talk in our professional community, and by that I mean, the teachers of students with visual impairments in North America, around that exact question, what constitutes literacy? And if a student is relying 100% on audio input, is that student literate in the traditional sense? And I would argue that listening is part of literacy, but it's by no means the whole story, because you do need a means of representing oral language in written or tactile or another form other than just what you're hearing. There's a reason why we all are essentially, we innately get to understand oral language, but learning to read takes years of specialist teaching And by specialist, I mean teachers who go to teachers college, get trained, and are then professionally ready to teach children to read. Reading doesn't come innately to us.
I've seen a number of cases in the past where parents have been told that their child is not going to be given Braille instruction because of all the availability of audio material. And I find that it's really interesting that a teacher would try and do that to a kid who's developing literacy, because you would never, ever have a teacher tell a parent that, okay, we're going to remove the pen and paper from the classroom and we are going to teach your child completely via television.
Right.
It just wouldn't happen.
No, you're right. And, just on a personal note, our mandate at PRCVI exists so that choice never has to be made. Our Braille production mandate, clearly lays out that if we get a request for a particular textbook or a particular material, that we're going to do everything we can to produce that. And so in many cases, it's not an availability issue. It could be, just as you pointed to, Steve, it could be a perception issue. There might be some hesitation on the part of parents to introduce Braille because there might be a perception that using technology or an exclusively auditory input might be more consistent with what peers are doing. But at the end of the day, those peers are also learn to read.
Right.
So,
and I've seen, I've interacted with a lot of kids in the school system over the years as well, and when I was doing the summer camps with over on Bowen Island for the Canadian National Institute of the Blind and Special Education Technology BC, I got to meet an awful lot of kids, and many of them were low vision, many of them were blind, some of them were Braille literate, and some were not. And one thing that I really noticed when we started interacting through social media, back in the day, it was things like MSN chat and so forth. The kids who learned Braille could spell.
Right, exactly. And, this is something that I feel needs a lot more research in our field in terms of if we do have this distinction between those who are Braille literate versus those who maybe rely more on auditory input. Because if you think about it just intuitively, if you have access to the written word, you can break those words down. And the other piece to it is you've got access to high quality input. I mean, one of the things that I often remark on is that if, let's say, for example, someone were to take a transcript of our conversation right now, we would not sound like the best users of English with all the ums and the ahs and the pauses and the slur and the slurred speech.
Well, I am functionally illiterate.
But that's just it. The speech input is not the best model for language, but having access to the written word is. And so if you have that as your template for language, well, then you're going to be able to write all and produce that language.
Well, and I think too that being able to see the written word and the context the words are written in is a huge differentiator between the auditory listening to a screen reader read to you versus being able to read it through your fingers. Words like two, and two, there, and there.
Yep.
Screen readers, they all sound the same.
Well, the other thing that jumps out at me when I think of along those lines as well are poetry. Poetry, the how poetry is displayed on the page often conveys something about the poem or the poet's mindset at the time. And that, that's lost with auditory only. The other thing I think of is, the Braille Authority of North America invests countless hours in developing and maintaining formatting guides for the Braille code. And no one's doing that because it's fun. They're doing it because, it is actually kind of fun, but that's beside the point. It is actually kind of fun, but they're doing that because there is just a fundamental need to make sure that anything that is represented in print can also be represented in Braille and represented well. And in fact, the switch to the Unified English Braille Code, of which Canada has ratified, and most of the English-speaking world, or at least members of the International Council on English Braille have ratified, draws Braille into closer correspondence with print. So essentially now the rule is how it is in print is how it is in Braille. If there's spaces or different kind of structural pieces, there's greater correspondence between the two. Just recognizing purely from an accessibility standpoint, but there are other reasons as well, but just from an accessibility standpoint, what appears in Braille also appears the same, what appears in print also appears the same way in Braille. And auditory only, while it can be, auditory input is very valuable for many students. And, I have some friends who are blind who are just avid consumers of audiobooks. I'm an avid consumer of audiobooks.
Oh, me too.
Yep.
Yeah. But when I talk to those friends, none of them regret learning Braille. None of them regret the time that it took. Because even though they might use quote unquote more efficient technological solutions now, the reason that the way they got to that point was by being literate and having those skills early on.
I think there comes a bit of independence when you have that Braille skill as well. Being totally blind myself, I'm not a strong Braille user, but relying on technology to label things around the house is only fine as long as the batteries are charged and working. If the batteries die, you don't have any batteries, I fall back to Braille. Right. I use Braille to label my Blu-rays, my vinyl LPs. Braille lasts.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, sure, and I mean, going back to the audiobook, talking about audiobooks, I mean, it's a, even as a sighted person, or a sighty, as Ryan likes to call me,
retinal chauvinist.
I've heard that one. That's the one that I
got that from John Lyon, who used to work at the CNIB, and I have no idea if he coined it or not, but I love it.
Which one's that?
Retinal chauvinist.
Yeah,
right.
I've heard that
awesome.
one.
But no, it's a very different experience. Like listening to an audiobook is a very different experience than reading that same book. Mm-hmm. When you're reading a book, you're much more connected to it. It's a much more interactive experience than having something literally read to you. It's just different.
Talking about those differences, something that's occupying a lot of our thoughts these days at PRCVI is this idea of accessible math and higher level math, and how auditory only is not able to you're not able to represent those things, the math equations, spatial equations, things like that. And so we're now thinking about what skills do our secondary school students need going into post-secondary in terms of those accessible maths and maybe some of the codes or markup languages they might need to be familiar with moving forward. But again, I think that also speaks to that notion that auditory only isn't the answer for many of our learners.
Well, math wasn't a solution for me as a learner either, so just don't do math, kids. Just don't do math. All right, so I'd like to kind of take a step back in time here and talk about where Braille came from. So I've got an article in front of me which I've pulled out of Wikipedia. It was linked to the Wikipedia article on Braille and the origins of Braille. And Braille was an improvement on night writing. And this dates back to the Napoleonic Wars back in 1820. Night writing, or sonography, was a system of code that used symbols of 12 dots arranged as 2 columns of 6 dots embossed on a square of paperboard. And it was so that soldiers could communicate silently and without light at night, because obviously you put on a light and they know where to start shooting. So they used to pass messages using these squares. Louis Braille, a few years later, decided to improve on that code, and Louis was a blind person. He'd lost his sight as a child. Yep. And he changed the code around into a 6-dot system instead of this 6x6 matrix. He made it much, much more efficient. So the first users of Braille were not primarily blind users. They were soldiers on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And so just goes to show anybody can learn Braille. even if they're carrying a gun.
So I guess that means that the very first Braille word was probably duck.
That's probably true. I bet they had a contraction for that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they did. So, and then of course, Braille went from there and into kind of more of the academic educational realm. And what's interesting is that if you look at the Braille code right now, there are a few like really interesting little vestiges of the original purpose for Braille reading and writing still kind of embedded in the code, much like we have old DNA in our DNA. Braille has some for example, some vestiges stuck behind. One of the ones that when I was first learning the code, I remarked, I couldn't figure out why some high frequency words weren't contracted and yet Lord was, or father and mother and thyself and spirit. And of course, that's a throwback to the first priority for learning Braille, at least at the specialized school level, was so that students could read the Bible.
Interesting.
And so that then students could read the Bible, and they could do that in almost like a public forum. So then that would generate donations for the school.
And how high would that pile be? If you'd brailled the Bible?
Oh my goodness! I once heard. I don't have an exact number, but I know the King James version of the Bible can take up a fairly size, like a room of ample volume.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been into a customer's house where they had the entire Bible in Braille, and it was 2 shelves that were probably, I want to say, about 15 feet long.
Oh, wow.
I want to say between 70 and 80 volumes. That number is standing out for me right now, but I might be wrong.
Interesting.
But
Yeah, somebody can write in. Somebody out there has their
will
Bible
know.
in Braille, and they can tell us exactly how many books there are.
Yeah.
In hard copy, yeah.
Excellent.
So then, of course, Braille, went on from there. And there's another interesting thing people might know is that Braille hasn't been the only tactile code that people who are blind or visually impaired have used since, as Steve mentioned, the 1820s onwards. There were several codes sometimes in competition with one another. And it was really only in the around the 1920s, early 30s that English Braille American Edition became the standard Braille code for Canada and the United States. Up until then, there were several different codes. There was, a raised line code. New York Point was another code. And so, interestingly, some individuals who are blind or visually impaired needed to learn 2 or 3 codes in order to be able to read materials that were going back and forth between communities around the turn of the last century.
This is probably a good time as well to mention the development of UEB.
Right.
Because
yeah.
even in English Braille, there were multiple codes of English Braille. There was UK Braille, there was North American
there was,
English Braille, there was Australian Braille.
Yeah, there was what was called Standard English Braille in the United Kingdom. And there was English Braille, as I mentioned before, English Braille American Edition in Canada and in the United States. And these codes had rule differences, character differences. And so if a student had a textbook from the UK put in front of them 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been in the same code as they might be accustomed to if they lived in the United States or Canada. And so there's been a movement over the last 10, 15 years to unify the codes. And so that if PRCVI were to produce a textbook, it would be just as intelligible to a student in Nigeria than it would be to a student in Cranbrook. And so it's been a major development, and it's something that our province has been spending a significant amount of time and resources updating our library. At PRCVI, we're up until grade 8 right now. We've got all of our materials and things up until the grade 8, and then we've got some students who are still using English Braille American Edition in the high school years, but we're moving towards full UEB implementation. But it's been a real a great process, I think, because you now, rather than having separate codes, I should also mention, just for anyone who's not aware, that there was a special code for mathematics and science notation prior to this move, and so now it's unified on the literary code and the mathematics code are united under one set of rules and one set of formats, and so it's an ongoing process, and different places in the across the globe are further along. The Australia and New Zealand sometimes laugh at some of the challenges that we face because, of course, they've been using UEB for 10 years or more.
And why is it their code that the rest of us adopted?
Well, it's interesting because the first moves toward unification were actually from two Americans, Abraham Nemeth and Tim Cramner. And they originally put a paper forward, I believe, in the early 90s. I could be wrong on that. I believe it was the early 90s. And so this issue of unifying the codes has really kind of ping-ponged around across the English-speaking world. I'm not sure exactly what the preconditions were in Australia and New Zealand to make it just such a seamless switch all those years ago. But it's certainly something that in Canada we've been following a somewhat gradual approach, although different provinces in terms of the kindergarten to grade 12 education system. Certain provinces are on different timelines.
Right. And what are the major differences? Because my understanding is there's only 7 or 8 contractions that are different.
Well, that's true. There's only a handful. You're right. That's in terms of the changes to the literary code.
Right.
So the literary code changes are ones that are, I'm going to say, relatively straightforward, and I say relatively because there's also some punctuation changes, some formatting changes. Whereas in the past, I'll give you an example. Whereas in the past, you weren't able to indicate whether something was bold, underlined, or italicized. Now the unified, thank you, the United Code, the Unified Code allows those distinctions to be made. Again, keeping along those lines of whatever appears in print
shows up in Braille.
Comes up in Braille.
Right.
Exactly. So the changes to the literary code are fairly straightforward. It's the changes to the technical code that I think take more work. Mm-hmm. Because again, we're moving from having two separate codes to one, and so while there are some fairly straightforward changes, we're finding just in our professional community that it's the changes to the technical code that take more time and effort to become fluent in.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I should mention as well that for any sighted people who are interested, Aroga has on our website a free UEB Braille chart. We are very thankful to Kay Holbrook at the University of British Columbia and her students, who she probably made slave away at it. You can download that for free. It is downloadable as a PDF. It's designed to print out on 11 by 17 paper, although you can print it out smaller if you want. I
should also say that Aroga chart is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So thank you for putting that out. It's a great resource to have, especially because some days, for someone like myself who was trained in the quote unquote old code in English Braille American Edition, it's sometimes good to have a reference at hand.
Yeah, I always used to use the one that Duxbury produced.
Yeah,
that was my go-to Braille chart before UEB came into play.
Mm-hmm.
So when it did, I really wanted a resource like that.
Right.
Right. And I think the way it's all been laid out is really quite excellent.
Yes. No. From a reference point of view, absolutely.
So if you've had a student going through, K to grade 8.
Mm-hmm.
Would you introduce UEB at that point, even though they've been using the standard Braille code up till then?
Well, let me backtrack and say that there are students in our province now who are in the grade 4 to 5 range for whom UEB is their native code.
Okay.
They've never used anything else. And that's because their kindergarten entrance corresponded with our implementation process.
Okay.
There are some students now who are in the kind of early middle school range, grades 7 and 8, who are transitioning between the codes right now. Okay. And then we have high school students who are still using the old code exclusively because they're either involved in high stakes testing, or they're involved in entrance exams, or they're involved in really, really kind of intense transition-oriented activities where we wouldn't want them to be at a disadvantage because they were learning a new code or they were having to use a new code that wasn't what they had learned.
Right.
But as I said, as time goes on and as our implementation continues, those cohort effects, as those cohorts move through, we're moving to full UEB implementation because UEB was ratified in Canada in 2010, and then we've just been working along on the implementation path since then. And different jurisdictions have different contextual reasons for why the UEB transition didn't take place over maybe a few years. For example, in British Columbia, we have up until a few weeks ago, actually, we had subject-specific provincial exams. And so we wouldn't want any of our students writing those exams to be at a disadvantage because they were writing them in a code that was new to them.
Right.
And so there's different contextual factors, but by and large, the goal nationally from coast to coast to coast is full UEB implementation.
Great.
We talked a little bit about why parents might be reluctant to have their kids learn Braille. Mm-hmm. In your opinion, who should be learning Braille? Like, what's the appropriate audience to learn Braille?
It's interesting. And I'm not going to say this because the originator of the process was my supervisor, but you mentioned Dr. Kay Holbrook, and I know what Dr. Kay Holbrook would say. She would say that it really depends on the assessment data that you get from working with a student. And so what we would do as teachers would be something called a learning media assessment. And that's a very systematic process that we would go through to determine what the most efficient and effective literacy medium would be for that student. For some students, it's print. For some students, it's large print. For some students, it's a combination of print and Braille. So a dual media learner, we would call them. Or for some students, it's full-time Braille. It's very difficult for me to sit here and put a particular, a student must have a certain visual acuity to read Braille. That's not the case at all. It depends more on how the student's functioning in the classroom, how they're using their vision or not using their vision, and it really depends on the outcomes of assessment. And that's why it's so important to connect with a qualified teacher of students with visual impairments, so that they can conduct these assessments and provide that expertise and that consultation in terms of the decision of whether a student will read print, Braille, or both. I can, in my work as a teacher, I've had students who have been exclusive Braille readers, full-time Braille readers. I've also had students who have read print and Braille. So these would be students who perhaps their vision might be deteriorating over time, or these are students for whom they might have low vision to the point where reading a book visually might be uncomfortable. And so they would be a Braille reader, but then let's say if they wanted to access a spatial math equation, well, then that might be enlarged or put under a closed circuit television. So I think there's no hard and fast rule. There's no threshold of who would read Braille and who wouldn't read Braille. It really depends on the individual, and it depends on knowledgeable assessment of that student. I know that's a really dry technical answer, but it's
it's a good answer, though. Yeah, I've always, when I've been talking to parents, I've always kind of used the rule of thumb that if their kid is going to go beyond 4 to 6 times magnification, that they might want to consider Braille as a means to efficiency in reading. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to have to add proviso on there that they should be properly assessed by a teacher of the visually impaired.
Absolutely.
Because that's something I haven't been saying, and I probably should be.
Absolutely. No, that does need to be there, because there's a series of there's a series of assessments that as teachers of the visually impaired we would do. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. First, we would do a functional vision assessment. And that would get a sense of, okay, taking that student's medical reports, their ophthalmology reports, their optometry reports, looking at what those reports say, but then trying to figure out exactly how those results play out in the real world. How does it function in a classroom? Because if you have numbers on a page, that doesn't necessarily tell you how the student uses their vision on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. And so you would have a functional vision assessment data, which would then feed into a learning media assessment. And the learning media assessment, I should also say, even though I've emphasized the teacher of students with visual impairments here, it's a team approach as well. There's a team that works on behalf of students. And so it's a collaborative process across that involves parents, classroom teachers, special education teachers, educational assistants, and of course, the linchpin there being the teacher of students with visual impairments. But yeah, can't emphasize that assessment piece enough.
Absolutely. So next question on best practices. When would it be most appropriate to start introducing Braille? Is it at the earliest possible age?
I am going to be 100% unequivocal here. Earliest possible. The one thing, we worked on an early literacy initiative, actually when I first moved to BC, 7 years ago now. Whoa. I think that's the first time I've said that out loud.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Time does fly. Wow. Ontario is just a vague memory at this point. Although with this heat, I'm getting some flashbacks.
Yeah.
We were running this early literacy initiative, and our approach there, we had a literacy kit that had both Braille and large print or low vision tools in it. And our approach there was really, having more tools in a child's toolkit is preferable to having few tools. And so if Braille or print or a combination of both is a tool moving forward, and then perhaps as the child moves into school, it becomes evident that, they can use print effectively, and we might emphasize those tools more so or over the Braille tools. But by and large, I think early as possible. We think of when we think of how much literacy knowledge our students who are typically sighted come to school with, many of them come with being able to, spell their name, the alphabet, or even if they don't have that, they've been seeing print everywhere. They know to recognize McDonald's because of the arches, or they know to recognize a dog because they've seen many different types of dogs and have a good concept of dog. And so early Braille for our students is so important because it speaks to that readiness issue, that students who are blind or visually impaired come to school ready to learn and ready to learn alongside their sighted peers.
And speaking of that, I noticed, I'm not sure if I showed you, Steve, but in doing a little bit of research for some of our upcoming shows, I did come across that kit. That's they're like large Lego pieces that show them
tactiles.
Yeah, that you can use to build Braille lettering, and obviously geared towards a fairly young age too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that was actually my next question: is how, when you're introducing Braille to a student for the first time, how do you generally go about that?
Well, that's a great question because there's a number of different ways to do it. So I'm just going to relay the strategies that I've used personally as a teacher of students with visual impairments. But this is there's no one way here. I think the key thing to keep in mind is just getting those hands on the Braille. That's the most important piece. If I'm reading a storybook with a child and they might be sitting next to me or sitting in front of me and my hands are I'm not reading the Braille with my hands. I might be reading the print that comes along in the book. But the most important thing is that young child has their hands on the Braille and is starting to make the connection. They're not reading the word for word, but they're starting to make the connection that, hey, all of these bumps mean something. They carry meaning. That's why it's also important to have labels around the house. Labeling things while the child might not know that all of these bumps together say table, they start to get a sense that, okay, I find these bumps everywhere. They must mean something. There must be some importance here. Like, my mom and dad aren't staying up all night putting labels on things just for good times. And so it really is about providing those environmental Braille experiences, because when we think of environmental print for our students who are typically sighted, that just happens incidentally. You can walk outside your house and read billboards and read signs and read buses, and for our students who are blind or visually impaired, it's important that they be as immersed as possible in a literacy environment that's accessible for them. And for our students who are totally blind or who have profound low vision, that will more than likely be through Braille.
Excellent.
So yeah, it's that I would emphasize the immersion piece there. Just that there's that early Braille is just an all-encompassing experience. You might make cupcakes and make Braille letters out of cupcakes, or with the one cupcake being one dot. You might one of my favorite things along the cupcake in the same vein as cupcakes was just to have a 2x3 muffin pan with a bunch of tennis balls, and we would just talk about the dots. The letter R. What dot numbers do you have there? Oh, okay, and then working it through. Combining that with just little fun activities that get the hands engaged. I used to have a game that my kindergarten students used to love called Magic Bag. Essentially what this was a bag of beads and buttons and things, and I would give them an example, and they would have to reach in without looking and find the pair, the bead that matched it, or the bean that matched it, or something like that. But just little games to get the hands moving. Play-Doh is great for that too.
Interesting.
I tell you, Steve, I have become quite the Play-Doh aficionado in my time.
Can you make your own Play-Doh?
I can, and I have an incredible recipe too.
All right, we'll get you to share your recipe.
I will share the Play-Doh recipe. Yes,
excellent.
It was quite good.
Because we need more toys around here.
We really do. I think maybe we should just spend an afternoon playing with Play-Doh.
Yeah, well, my Slinky's lonely, so.
So you're involved in something else, which is pretty cool, and that is the Braille Challenge.
The Braille Challenge, yes.
Yeah, tell us about the Braille Challenge.
Okay, so the Braille Challenge is an academic Braille reading and writing competition that takes place across Canada and the United States. It's sponsored by the Braille Institute of America. Students either write at regional challenges, so regional events, or they write one-on-one with their teacher of students with visual impairments. It's a set of five. There are 5 events or challenges, and examples of those events. There's spelling, there's reading comprehension, proofreading. Some of the older students will do speed and accuracy, and that's where they're listening to a text and have to transcribe what they hear. There's also a tactile graphics challenge as well. And so students, as I said, they compete either regionally or one-on-one, and then the top scoring students in North America are invited to the National Braille Challenge, which takes place every year in Los Angeles. And so this year the National Challenge is on June 18th, so not too
coming up fast.
Coming up fast, and I'm very proud to report that Canada will be represented this year by students from British Columbia. We have 3 students from British Columbia who participated at our regional Braille Challenge that we have in Vancouver every year at the University of British Columbia. And those 3 students placed in the top 10 in their age categories, and will be traveling to Los Angeles fairly soon. So we wish them all the luck. Yeah.
So what kind of odds is Vegas giving them to win this thing?
Vegas.
I don't know. We've got some really strong students. So I have to say, we have students who have placed second and third, sometimes won their categories. So I think the odds are pretty good.
All right. So we should be betting on these kids, is what you're saying.
Well, officially
Put
no.
some money down.
Officially no. But if anyone's interested, the Braille Institute of America, you will usually have a live webcast of at least the closing ceremonies. And so it's always very exciting for us to be able to get together and watch that and cheer on some of our British Columbia students who are down at the Braille Challenge. And it's really just, when obviously the competition piece is very important, and kids, I mean, who doesn't like to take home a little bit of hardware? But it's also just the opportunity to get together with kids who read and write just like they do, and to trade stories and, you know, talk about technology and what others are using. Should also mention at our British Columbia Regional Challenge this year, we created an entirely different competition category for our students who might be using Braille in more foundational ways. So students who might be using Braille as to make lists or to put labels on things, or who might be not working at their academic level, but still who are Braille users. And so we've got those students joining us as well at the British Columbia Challenge. It was great to have them this year too, because it really shows the diversity of the community of students who read Braille in the province.
So when they're writing Braille in these challenges, are they using a slate stylus? Are they using a Perkins Brailler?
Currently, the rules state a manual Perkins Braille writer. Mm-hmm. But I have heard that there will be an option next year for students in the older competition categories to write using electronic note takers.
Oh, wow.
But that's something that's in the experimental phase at this point. Traditionally, the students have produced hard copy Braille because one of the advantages of the Braille Challenge, specifically in British Columbia, is that we have an incredible community of Braille transcribers. So professionals who are responsible for producing Braille. And we have anywhere between 10 and 15 Braille transcribers come every year to volunteer, and our students' materials are graded on the spot. Wow. And so that hard copy Braille is rushed upstairs, it's graded, and we're able to, at our closing ceremonies on the day of, announce the winners of each category.
That's awesome.
Which is my favorite part of the day. It's a great time. But yeah, the Braille Challenge is, again, I'm a little bit biased because I am the regional coordinator of the British Columbia Regional Braille Challenge, but it's a great day, and if anyone listening is interested, has a student in mind that they think might like to participate, registration is done through the student's teacher of students with visual impairments. So all of the teachers of students with visual impairments in the province get the registration form, and we'd love to see them.
Alrighty. So you mentioned the Perkins Brailler there, and I think that's a good way to segue into Braille Technology.
Right.
What's out there for Braille Technology? I've been involved with Braille Technology since I started with Aroga 25 years ago. Back then, I was working with things like a Italian solenoid-driven electronic refreshable Braille display that hooked up to Apple computers. I was working with the VersaBraille from Telesensory Systems, which used a cassette tape to load programs. What else did we have back then? We had the VersaBraille Braille printer.
Was this around the Opticon?
This was around the time of the Opticon. Yeah. I did a lot of repairs on Opticons. That was a hugely popular device back then, and a really powerful device. For those who don't know, the Opticon had an array of pins, and it didn't actually display Braille. You had a little handheld camera which you could run over top of print, and typically, print being black text on a white background, wherever there was black, it would raise the pins on the array of pins, and wherever there was white, it would keep them down. So you could actually feel the shapes of letters with them. And people learned to read very, very efficiently with the Opticon, to the point where I know a couple of people who actually put themselves through law school reading all of their law books strictly with an Opticon, and that's really quite an impressive achievement, and shows some real hard-headed determination.
Absolutely.
But Braille technology really these days is primarily using a bimorph system. It's a 3-layer wafer that you sit a pin on top of, and when you apply voltage to one side of the wafer, it bends the wafer up, and when you apply voltage to the other side of the wafer, it bends the wafer down. So you have your dots up or your dots down sitting on top of that little wafer. So for every Braille cell, in electronic refreshable Braille, typically you've got 8 cells. You use dot 7 and dot 8 to show you things like the cursor position, for example. So you have to have 8 of these little bimorphs driving these dots up and down. And there really is no other consumer use for this technology. It's strictly used for Braille, and as a result, it's only manufactured in small quantities, and it's extremely expensive. It's like $100 per Braille cell for your typical Braille display. Now, there's all kinds of projects that are going on to try and make Braille more accessible by making it less expensive. Right. And I actually did a search, and I found on the DAISY website. DAISY is a talking book standard, but they had a list of different Braille technology that they had been able to dig out. And there's actually 63 different Braille technologies that I found. And some of them just sound quite bizarre. Parallel actuation, mechanical, revolving belt. Some of them are just really difficult to understand because they don't really say what they are. EAP, multi-layer DEA. Piezo, which is probably piezoelectric, laser diode activation of a nanostructured polymer. That's my favorite.
That sounds like a great band name.
Oh my God! Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, make note of that for the world's worst band. We could have the world's best name for the world's worst band. EAP ferroelectric. That's also a good band name. Actually, most of these would make good hydrogel tactile graphics. I see a lot of punk bands starting. Solenoids mounted on a scanner.
Or lyrics. If you're not going to use it as a band name, just there'll be lyrics.
That's right.
That says love song all over it.
Yeah.
It's a ballad.
Yeah, and some of them on the list just say available under NDA, so you've got to sign a non-disclosure agreement if you want to know anything about it. Oh, here's a good one: innovative wax actuation. That's
wow.
Cool. Matrix of heat pixels. Transmits electro-vibration stimulus ultra thin. I actually went to the website for that one because I wanted to see what it was, and it's listed on this list as being a Japanese technology, but when I went to the website, it's actually a Finnish company, and they have no information whatsoever on their website, just the fact that they're a company. That's it. No way to contact them, nothing.
Sounds a little suspicious.
I suppose. Anyway, so there's lots and lots of work being done to try and make Braille more accessible and cheaper. RNIB has just recently come out with a device, and I've totally blanked on the name of the device. Ryan, the little book reader that they've just...
the one CNAB is exclusive?
The one CNAB is selling in Canada.
Orbit.
Orbit?
Is that correct?
I think so.
I think it might be the Orbit, yeah.
I heard a blind Braille reader. I was at a show last week, and he had a chance to try it, and he was really, really enthused by this device. It's I think about a $400 device.
That's what's that's the marketing literature I've seen. Yeah, somewhere in that range, which is that's great savings compared to.
Oh, absolutely.
What else is
and if
out
it gets
there?
Braille into people's hands and lets them, read recreationally, more power to it. I hope it's a hugely successful device.
Absolutely.
And of course, the other technologies that are predominant these days are Braille printers. There's lots and lots of Braille printers out on the market these days. You can get both single-sided and double-sided Braille printers. For the work you do, I know you have double-sided Braille printers in PRCVI, but how much double-sided Braille do you actually produce? Is it primarily single?
None. Yeah, we primarily produce single-side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why did you make that decision?
Do you know, I'm not actually sure, Steve. I'm not entirely sure why that is the case. I know that it's worked into our policy, though. And unfortunately, I think that certainly predates my time there. Because I have seen materials over the years, when I worked in Ontario as well, that were in Interpoint. But no, we don't produce an Interpoint.
Interesting, because my assumption has always been that it's more difficult for somebody to read Interpoint Braille because of the valleys, I guess, that you would have from the Braille on the opposite side.
Well, and the other piece as well is from everything we do at PRCVI is informed from the pedagogical perspective as well. Like, we have to think of how is this going to be taught? How is this going to be used in the classroom? And it's it's much easier for the teacher of the visually impaired, teacher of students with visual impairments rather, to follow along with what the student's reading and to maybe address any Braille reversals or any issues that they're having with their reading if it's printed just single side. Because of course interpoint Braille is next to impossible to read visually.
Right.
So as a teacher of students with visual impairments, that would actually be my preference, because I would be able to kind of better assess where my student was having an issue on the page if we were able to kind of pinpoint it together. And then I could look and see, okay, well, what dot numbers are there? Is the student confusing a symbol because it's a mirror image of another? It'd be much easier to diagnose that way.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, so that would be my teacher answer, but in terms of the official policy, I'm not entirely certain.
Okay. Other devices out there, electronic refreshable Braille note takers. There's a lot of them out there. Best known ones, at least for North America, are probably the Braille Note from Humanware and the Braille Sense from HIMS. There's also things like the 6-dot Braille Labeler that's out there for producing labels. There is, of course, the ubiquitous and always about Perkins Brailler and the Perkins Smart Brailler.
Bluetooth Braille keyboards like the Braille Pen, the Focus 14, Super Vario or the Vario Ultra.
Right.
And the one thing I think is important to note as well is that the technology piece and the way that Braille intersects with technology isn't just for our kind of, kids in university or students, who are older. There's also technology like the Mountbatten, and you mentioned the Smart Brailler as well, Steve, that are very, very useful with our students right from kindergarten, right from day one. So this notion that technology has really improved Braille opportunities for Braille usage or increased opportunities. It's true for our students right along kindergarten to grade 12.
Now, what do you think? Does the new 3D printing technology have anything to lend to?
Oh, absolutely.
I think it opens things up greatly. We've started 3D printing a few things here and there at PRCVI to add to our collection, because I should also mention that in addition to Braille textbooks in Braille and textbooks in large print, PRCVI also circulates learning resource kits, 3D models, various learning materials across the province to students in the K-12 education system. And so we've looked at ways to increase our holdings really with 3D printed materials. And one of the uses we see right now in terms of the Braille there is Braille labels printed right directly onto 3D models, which is great because we can send a Braille we can send a tactile model with the Braille printed right onto it. We can send that up all four corners of the province, and then have it come back down in great shape.
No more looking for Dymo tape labelers.
Well, exactly. Well, it decreases our reliance on having to relabel items for sure. Yeah.
And things are only going to get better the more mainstream that technology becomes.
Yeah, I would even think for things like mapping, where you want to have a tactile representation of a map, and you want to have Braille labels on there. That would be a really powerful technology as well.
Absolutely.
Because I know, we've used a lot of tactile graphic systems in the past, such as the PIAF, and there's a number of different products that use the same process, where you have a specialized paper, and when you lay a carbon trail down on that paper and run it through a toaster, it basically cooks the paper, and the carbon reacts with the paper and causes it to swell up. Some people call it Swell Touch paper. Yep. I think there's a couple of different brand names out there for it. The one Aroga sells is primarily the PIAF. And those are great for creating tactile diagrams. But when you go to put Braille on them, it can get kind of tricky. You've got to get the size of it right. You've got to get the temperature right to have it rise properly. And even then, it's not quite as distinct as it would be if you'd run something through a Braille printer.
Some of those issues are still true with 3D printing, and the reason I say that is because you've got to get those specifications right. You've got to get the dimensions of the Braille cell correct. And if you're designing something from scratch with software, that you really need that knowledge of what those dimensions are. So getting good quality Braille is a priority for some of our 3D printed materials. But just in terms of the value added above a traditional tactile graphic, when you've got something that's 3D printed, using that height dimension, you can really represent things that aren't possible with traditional 3D graphics. Like, for example, I'm aware of one design that I'm curious about is one where it's the periodic table. And so each of the elements, of course, are represented by their short form, so that it's in Braille. But then the periodic table is the height of each element on the table depends on the density of that element. And so the higher the higher a little element square is raised, the more dense the element is. And so you've got this ability to be able to show a concept that you wouldn't been able to do with traditional paper pieces of the paper you were mentioning before, Steve. So I think 3D printing there's a lot of promise there, but I think at the same time we've also got to be really purposeful about why we're doing it. Because the other thing is, there's many models out there of different lobes of the brain, but PRCVI has had 3D models of the brain for 10, 20 years, and so it's important to find those value-added pieces. That's just my 3D printing soapbox.
No, sounds good.
I could 3D print a soapbox.
And then stand on it.
Stand on a literal soapbox when I deliver my soapbox speech on 3D printing, yes.
Actually, you should do that. You should literally do a presentation called
3D soapbox. Or something.
Yeah, 3D printing from the soapbox, and go out and stand on a soapbox. I would watch that presentation.
Ironically, I'd be breaking my own rule though, because I could just as easily stand on a box from anywhere. But I like the idea.
All right, let's talk a couple news stories really quickly before we wrap up, because wow, we're long. I think this is the most professional show that we've ever done.
Is it setting a new standard?
It might be.
I hope not.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, all right.
I'll never
Maybe we'll leave that joke of Steve's in just to lower the bar a bit, because we don't want to. So, do you guys know what June is, other than really hot?
I do, because I've got it on these notes right in front of me.
You cheat.
I do.
All right,
I don't have my notes, so tell me.
It's June is Deaf Blind Awareness Month.
Cool.
It is. When the goal of it is to celebrate Helen Keller and to raise the profile of deaf blindness in Canada as a unique disability.
That actually raises a question, and this is one I've never really been involved with. But when you're teaching somebody who's deaf blind Braille, how do you start that?
It's interesting, Steve. I have worked with several students who are deaf blind in the past, but some of them have either been more kind of foundational literacy learners, or they've been print users. I've never had a student. I know they're out there. I know they're out there. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that most students who we would refer to as multisensory impaired or deafblind are not totally deaf or totally blind or both. And so there's usually some residual hearing or some residual vision that we can capitalize on in terms of working with these students. But I can't speak from experience here. I've not taught Braille to a student who's deafblind.
Yeah, that could actually probably be a topic of a whole different show.
It could be.
Yeah.
There are some great people in the deafblind education community who would make incredible podcast guests.
Yeah, I'm thinking we could chase after Linda Mamer.
I was just going to say, she would be great for a podcast. Yeah.
You hear that, Linda? Start running now. Steve's going to be after you with the lasso.
Yeah,
that's right. Write that down, Steve.
I will do
Write that down. Write that down.
LINDA.
I've actually had two different show ideas since we started that, because I think it would be really cool to bring in people from the various CLVP projects around North America. We could do that remotely.
Using Zoom.
Using Zoom, yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Because we could bring in
Rebecca
Coakley from West Virginia. And we could bring in Lynn from Kelowna, and we could probably get Roy McConnell from Alberta.
Yeah, and just do a live podcast.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Great idea. Yeah, it's like 2 ideas and a joke. You're going to need a nap after this.
Fortunately, he brought coffee.
The venerable carafe.
Carafe.
That's right. Yes. So June is a Deaf Blindness Awareness Month. We're going to have a link to there. I guess they've got a complete calendar of events going on all month. I think a lot of them are back east. I think in the Toronto area. But we'll have
the CDBA British Columbia office has some events happening throughout the month. So
excellent.
Definitely check those out.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll be including a link to the calendar of events, and you can see what's going on in your area to help celebrate June without sweating to death like we are right now. It's really hot in here. You guys hot?
I don't mind.
No, that's pretty good.
It's okay.
You're on the hot seat.
Apparently.
Yeah.
I'm right by the window, so that's
That
probably
could be
why.
it.
Menopause. Get it? Men?
Oh.
That gave us pause.
See, now we're lowering the bar. This is much better. Now we're back in the quagmire that we're usually. Hey, speaking of
Quagmires?
No, it's a horrible segue.
That's a terrible segue. Look, I hear Jay say 14.1 upgrade has dropped.
Really?
That's what I hear.
Is it really? Yeah, I heard that too. It's funny. Yeah, it has. What exactly is JSay again, Ryan?
JSay is a set of scripts that tie the JAWS screen reader and Dragon Naturally Speaking products together so that somebody who is totally blind and needs to be able to access their computer using speech can do so.
Fantastic. And this looks like this upgrade is free.
For anybody using JSay 14. Yeah.
Right. And so we'll include that in the show notes as well. And one more little piece of software news. It looks like JAWS 17 has an update that's available as... Is this, Ryan, is this a free app?
It's free for those running JAWS 17. Yeah.
Perfect.
So it's a minor update.
Minor
update 217?
Yeah.
Excellent. I still find that astounding that we're all the way up to JAWS 17.
Oh, I know.
When I first lost my sight, I started with JAWS 3.2.
Yeah. And we started with JAWS
DOS?
1.0. We didn't do much with JAWS DOS.
Okay.
We were telesensory dealers and had done a lot of work with Screen Power.
Right.
And before that, VERT for DOS. But we got involved with JAWS as Windows was starting to become a thing. We actually got involved with 3 different ones: JAWS, Screen Power for Windows, and I'm trying to remember the name of the other one. It was a locally produced one, and I'm just drawing a complete blank here. ProTalk. It was called ProTalk. But over the years, ProTalk couldn't keep up with the development pace that was necessary. Screen Power couldn't keep up with the development pace that was necessary, and JAWS just leapt ahead.
Right.
So, yeah, nice to see that they're still going and up to version 17.
That's right. And the shark still looks fake.
Well, what, you want a realistic shark?
I demand it. By JAWS 17, if they don't have a realistic shark, I mean, come on.
JAWS
What are we
18.
doing?
I'm sure JAWS 18, it's probably right at the top of their development priorities.
Yeah.
Jump right off the screen.
Yeah, getting a realistic shark.
And last bit of news, just a plug about this upcoming webinar that we have called The Importance of Braille, since we're talking about Braille today. We here at Aroga have partnered with Braille Literacy Canada to do a little bit of an online webinar next week on Wednesday, June 15th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And anyone who's interested in hopping in and joining, it's free, and you can sign up on the Aroga Technologies website at www.aroga.com and just look for the webinar graphic. It's at the bottom right-hand corner of the page. Or you can email Ryan at aroga.com and he will set you up.
Now, we also need to say thanks to a few people as well for promoting our podcast.
Absolutely. When we first started doing this, we didn't think anybody was going to listen to us, and it turns out that a few people have, and a few people are actually spreading word about it.
That's right. So first off, I want to thank Larry Lewis for including us in his Flying Blind newsletter.
That's right. Yeah, it's actually a great newsletter if you're in the blindness community, or if you have a family member in the blindness community or low vision impairment. You should really be subscribed to this newsletter because it's great. We're all signed up for it here, and you can sign up at www.flying-blind.com.
It is a fantastic newsletter. It's probably the best newsletter out there that keeps track of new developments within the industry. I've never seen one that is as detailed and well put together. And Larry is a good past friend or present friend. He hasn't passed yet. Although with the current U.S. election cycle, he may keel over and die because it's killing him. So be gentle with Larry when you're dealing with him. He's a lovely man.
I also want to thank the Lower Mainland Visually Impaired Facebook group and those involved with that for promoting our podcast and listening as well.
Basically, I guess anybody in general who's been listening to our ramblings and wow, I just completely.
And there's Rob's
I think I need a nap. Maybe I need a nap.
Blanked out there.
It's that hot window seat.
Yeah,
That's right.
It's the heat.
Yeah, thanks to everybody who's been listening to our show. If you have anything you'd like us to cover on our show, things or just want to throw in details that we may have missed, you can visit us on our website at www.atbanter.com. You can also email us hate mail at atbanterpodcast@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be hate mail. I'd just like to point that out.
Yeah, it can be like mail.
But we do read everything.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, what Ryan said.
We do. We read it all, and we try to answer where we can.
Yeah, and we should probably give a shout out to Hugh, who sent us, I believe, our first official podcast email.
That's right. Word up, Hugh.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. Glad
Thanks,
to know you're
Hugh.
out there.
Eek, eek.
Allie also sent us an email with some suggestions as well.
Yeah, Ali.
So
All right.
people are listening. And I think we should thank Adam.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
He's got out of the ropes.
That's good. Yeah, the ropes, the duct tape, and everything. I managed to get on and off my 3D printed soapbox. It's good stuff. Thank you very much for including me. And if I could stand back on that 3D printed soapbox for 1 minute, when we're talking about Braille, we really just have to keep in mind that, we're not get kind of bogged down in the particulars of how it's being accessed or what the particular details are. It's all about literacy at the end of the day. At the end of the day, it's all about literacy and making sure that our students who are blind or visually impaired have the same opportunities for accessing the literate world as our students who are typically sighted.
Excellent.
Agreed.
Great summary.
Thank you.
All right. And that is going to do it for us today. I'm Rob Minot.
I'm Steve Barclay,
And I'm Ryan Fleury.
and he's also here
And I've been Adam Wilton.
the whole time.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you next week.
This podcast has been brought to you by Aroga Technologies. Visit Aroga Technologies online at www.aroga.com. That's AROGA.com. Music provided by bensound.com.